And then finally, as far as wrestlers go, probably my favorite person to interview, and I've interviewed him now, I think 3 times, Mick Foley.
I'm lucky. We have a huge guest today. Before we get to him, I want you to subscribe to all the links in the description box below. MVP's not here this week. He'll be on the next episode. He had some stuff going on. So without further ado, with our guest, please welcome a man who has interviewed presidents, musicians, actors, comedians, athletes, and many wrestlers, editor of Review St. Louis, and author of his own book, For the Love of the Show. Please welcome Dr. Jeremy Housewright. Jeremy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners where to follow you on social media, all that good stuff. Where can they find you?
So I just opened my own website yesterday, jeremyhousewright.com, or you can find me on Facebook at jmhousewright, Instagram, Dr._Jeremy_Housewright, and then Twitter or X is Heinous HeinOusJ.
Nice. Okay. Make sure you go follow him. He's got a lot of good stuff. I've been looking at your website and going through your YouTube, and a lot of good interviews and stuff, man. So I really like the content you put out, and I'm happy to have you here.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yep. So I did have a chance to look over your book. I read it. Why don't you tell everyone about your book and what it's about, and we'll get started.
So For the Love of the Show, Pro Wrestling Fans Tell Their Stories is essentially telling my story throughout the entire book, and then each chapter in between, I interviewed a wrestling fan who had a story that talked about how their life was positively affected by being a fan of pro wrestling. So that's essentially what the book's about. I just kind of went all over the country and found people with interesting stories to tell.
Yeah, and when I was reading it, it's just amazing to see people's stories of this isn't just a hobby, something they watch like we watch football. Like it has a big impact on their life and the things they do. And I thought it was a great read. I just started a new job, so I was on the train every day, and I just read it every day on the train ride. I was like, wow, this is a really good book. I'm really digging it. So
thank you. Appreciate that.
So yeah, so you've interviewed many actors, athletes, and wrestlers. I just have a question. Do you have any one interview that sticks out in particular as like your favorite one?
There's a few that really kind of stick out. I tried to think of one from like each different background that I've covered over the years. I think one of my first ones would probably be one of my very early interviews when I was in college as a lifestyle editor for the newspaper at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. I interviewed, 2 guys actually. I interviewed Tommy Chong. He was one of my first interviews, and he was really cool. And then the second one that got me into some trouble was Stuttering John Melendez. And for those people who don't know who that is, it's a guy who used to work with Howard Stern. And he also was on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And he's a stand-up comedian. Anyway, he was coming to Edwardsville, Illinois to do a show. So literally probably one of my really first big-name interviews at the time. And so I wrote the story about it and put it in the paper. And I come in the next morning, as I always do, and my voicemail is literally full, which is weird because nobody ever called me. And I started listening to the voicemails, and the secretary had all these messages on my desk. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And I'm listening to the voicemails, and I'm like, I can't really understand these individuals. And well, she comes back with the newspaper, and the headline of my story was, "Did I stutter?" ? Apparently, all the individuals who were in the special ed department for people with speech impediments were picketing out in front of my office with signs. And that's why I couldn't understand them on the phone when they left messages. So, it was one of my first ventures into kind of hot water, I guess. Not my last, and probably will never, still not be my last. But that was interesting. And then Gene Simmons, lead singer of Kiss, was one that I really enjoyed just because of the fact that I got him to talk about his mother, who actually survived the Holocaust. And
Oh,
it was pretty neat listening to him talk about that. It was more of an interview about his business endeavors, not Kiss. He talked about supporting the troops and how he's a big supporter of the police and things like that. Big supporter of animal rights and things like that. So it was a different interview for Gene, and I really enjoyed it. Another one that I always think about is Ron Jeremy, the porn star.
yeah.
And my goal with that, this was probably about 5, 6 years ago. And if anyone doesn't know about him now, he's actually sitting in prison for all kind of different charges that have to do with sexual assault and such. But anyway, when I interviewed him, he was going around the country doing a stand-up comedy tour. And my goal with the story was not to have anything to do with pornography in it, which was kind of difficult given his career and
Right.
as many movies as he's made and such. But I actually never mentioned the word porn or porn star or anything like that at all. We wound up talking about how he has a doctorate and how he was originally wanting to be a Broadway actor. So very, very fascinating interview with him at the time. Another one that I always think about is Billy Bob Thornton, who I just interviewed last summer. And I was very nervous about his interview because, and I didn't even know this had happened. Several years earlier, he had given an interview with a DJ at a radio station. And Billy Bob was there promoting his band, the Boxmasters. He plays in a band, and that's actually what he does more of now than even make movies. And the DJ started asking him about movies, and Billy Bob just went off on the guy. And he's always got this rep of being kind of a tough guy to get along with, and I found him to be totally opposite. He was great. One of my favorite interviews I've ever done, just because he was so open and talking to him about his passion, which is music, not even acting. He loves music. He's a big Beatles fan. And I think his band's released like 13 albums or something like that. And I actually got to meet him. I went and met with him before they played a show that I interviewed him for, and got a photo with him. And I actually gave him a copy of a St. Louis Cardinal book because he's a big Cardinal fan. Being that we're in St. Louis, everyone's Cardinal fans, but me, I think. So he was really cool. And then as far as like sports go, Kurt Warner was one of my favorite ones. He was really cool. And then Rob Zombie, as far as musicians go, that was another early interview. I think I was very lucky to snag that one because I was early in my writing career at the time. And it was right around when Napster kind of really started taking a lot of flack for illegal downloading of music. And we talked a lot about that. So he's a really interesting guy, very intelligent guy. You wouldn't have realized he was a lead singer from White Zombie by talking to him. And then finally, as far as wrestlers go, probably my favorite person to interview, and I've interviewed him now, I think 3 times, Mick Foley.
Okay.
Mick is, for me, one of the most interesting individuals I've ever interviewed out of anybody. He is a very fascinating person with his writing background that really intrigues me. So we talk a lot about writing. We talk a lot about entertaining because every time I've talked to him, he's been on tour doing his stand-up or storytelling tour, whatever he does. So he was always really cool to talk to, very down to earth. One of the funny stories he told me was after matches, he used to sleep on fans' couches to save money because he was so cheap. And anyone who knows Mick knows he's one of the probably richest wrestlers around right now, besides The Rock, probably, or Stone Cold. But he saved all his money by sleeping on couches of fans in cities. And he said one night he was sleeping on a fan's couch here in St. Louis, and it was actually East St. Louis. He didn't know, being from the East Coast, Mick didn't know St. Louis from East St. Louis. And he said about 2 or 3 in the morning, people started coming and going out of this house. And he woke, he wakes up. He's like, what the heck's going on? He was sleeping in the house of a known crack dealer. And they were making drug deals. So he told me that was the last time he ever slept on a fan's couch. After that, his wife would not allow him when he was on the road. So he then started having to pay for hotels. So, just interesting stories like that. Mick is still, I mean, every time I get the chance to talk to him, I do, because he's a really fascinating individual.
He's a great storyteller too. I mean, the
Yeah.
stories that he has for Over the Road so many years is just second to none. And I mean, it sounds like you've had a lot of great experiences, and doing what you do, you just get to find out so much about so many different people. It's just amazing. So, but your book, For the Love of the Show. So I read it. I think it's a great account of many people and their love for wrestling. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, I've been wanting to write a book for a long time, and just wasn't sure what to write about. I'd start some ideas, and then I just would let them go by the wayside, because either I didn't have time or I just didn't have the want to finish. And pro wrestling is something that I have a strong passion for. And I've been working with the WWE for the past 7 or 8 years, every time they roll through town. And I travel to the different shows to take photos for my outlet, and, interview a lot of the superstars. And we've had a great relationship over the past 7 or 8 years. They take care of me at all these shows, and I appreciate that. And, going to some of these shows, I met a few people that I became lifelong friends with. At WrestleMania 33, we met a guy from Canada, and he wound up coming up and just talking to us, because my buddy who was with us was wearing a Cleveland Browns T-shirt, and he came up and he's like, "Hey," and he had that Canadian accent, and he said, "I've never met anyone who wore a Cleveland Browns T-shirt before." I kind of started laughing, and I'm like, "Yeah, this dude's the only one that would wear one," And we talked the whole night at the Hall of Fame, and it wound up we were staying 20 miles away, which, if you read the book, there's a story about a hotel.
Yep.
That's the same hotel I'm talking about right now, but we were staying at this Days Inn, and lo and behold, this dude was staying right next door to us, 20 miles away. I don't know how it happened, but we didn't get rid of him the whole trip. He wound up coming to St. Louis and hanging with me, and I took him to Kansas City for a Chiefs game, because he's a Seahawks fan, and I wanted to show him real NFL fans who aren't bandwagon, know how to tailgate. So I took him to a Chiefs game, and then just meeting a few other people from LA, and then we'd get together in Vegas for Double or Nothing. And I thought, all these cool stories that I have from these trips, like the hotel incident, and meeting Joey from Canada, and my buddies from LA and Chicago, and I'm like, there's got to be people with really cool stories. So I started kind of asking around, and I wanted it to be something that was positive, and that painted wrestling in a positive light. And so it was a little harder to find, some people with really intriguing stories. But I started searching around, and I found some people. Some people reached out to me, and then I had an idea, like Izzy Moreno. I already knew I wanted her in the book. Derek Baker, I knew I wanted Derek in the book. The other four individuals I happened to stumble upon, either different internet sites or Facebook, somewhere or another. We connected on different pages. And I reached out to everybody. We talked for a few hours at a time, and, put their stories in. And so that's kind of how it came about.
That's awesome. Yeah. And again, I just love the stories. The guy that did Bray Wyatt's tattoos and how the mask came about, and that's just so many cool stories in that book. I can't highly recommend it enough. I mean, I got to give it to my co-partner MVP. He hasn't had a chance to read it, but yeah, it's definitely a great book.
Thank you.
So what was it like hearing all the people's stories for the book and learning how impactful wrestling was to them?
There were a couple stories that really I liked all of them, and that's why they're in the book. I had left a couple out because they just didn't appeal to me, and it was nothing against the people. It's just I didn't think they fit.
Right.
And but each one of these stories has a meaning behind it, and they're all different. The one thing they all have in common is they all love professional wrestling. But I think hearing Izzy's story, about how she's been a fan, and I've known who Izzy is since I was 30. I'm 42 now, I think. she's been calling into Busted Open ever since I've been listening. And I was always intrigued at how this young girl loved wrestling so much and knew so much about it. So hearing that she wanted to be a pro wrestler and following her journey, to Mission Pro Wrestling in Texas, and starting to live out her dream, that was a story I had to tell. I just knew that that would be something that people would want to read about. Derek Baker, who is 26-year-old guy here in St. Louis, and he has a 3 million followers on TikTok and Instagram. Just the biggest wrestling fan I've ever met in my life. And growing up with an uncle who had Down syndrome and being an educator myself and loving to work with autistic kids and, knowing how challenging not only life can be for them, but they can be on their family at times. And seeing Derek out quite a bit at the shows here in St. Louis, because they always sit Derek near me. The press tickets are always hard camera side. So I always, if I don't see Derek, I wind up hearing him throughout the night somehow.
Yeah.
And, I went and finally introduced myself to him at Royal Rumble in 2022, I believe, here in St. Louis. And seeing the way the people gravitated to him, just wrestling fans lining up 20, 30 deep to get a photo with him and shake his hand and tell him how much they love him. And then seeing his videos on YouTube of meeting these superstars that, most of us would not know what to do if we met, if we just walked backstage, which I've been backstage and I've seen some famous guys, and for him to, meet CM Punk and Cody Rhodes backstage in an AEW show, and he drops down on his knees and tells Punk he's my hero, and Punk grabs him and hugs him. I mean, I was almost in tears watching that, so that was a story that I really wanted to tell. And then, Kyle's, who you just mentioned, the tattoo artist, that actually, I interviewed Kyle 4 years before I even thought about writing the book. I had found out that the day after Bray Wyatt debuted as The Fiend, somehow I found out, I think it was on Twitter, I saw Kyle had posted some renderings of the mask. And as I read on, I realized that he created the mask. Well, we had all been told that Tom Savini created the mask, which he did, but the actual sketches and the creation of it was from Kyle, who's a tattoo artist here in Washington, Missouri. And so I did an interview with him 4 years earlier and wrote the article about it. And when I was doing this book, I'm like, hey, that would be a great story to include. So why not just update it a little bit and throw it in, which I did. And then I remember I was sitting down here one afternoon, early evening, working on the book, talking to some friends about it, and word broke that Bray Wyatt had passed away. And I thought, Jesus Christ, this totally changes this story. Yeah. So I reached back out to Kyle, and he had provided me with a photo of him and Bray together, and the actual text message chain the night Bray debuted the Fiend mask. I believe it was SummerSlam. And it was really cool, man. I feel like not only did it give me some closure on it, because, I've seen many wrestlers in my time come and go and pass away, but Bray's death hit me hard because he was one of them guys that I looked at as somebody who kind of looked like me. He wasn't a body guy. He wasn't, your 24-inch pythons. Yeah. He was a normal looking dude who was just creative as hell. And, I truly think that loss is going to be felt in the WWE for decades, because he was one of the more creative minds out there, and the fans loved him, and he loved the business. And, by all accounts from people that have met him, I never had the chance to meet him, but they just said how much of a family man he was and how kind he was to his fans. So I felt like that story needed to be updated, and that needed to be put in the book. And so I went to Kyle and I asked him, if I could have these things that he had posted on social media, and he agreed, and I was very grateful for it. So yeah, those were some of the stories that really I kind of felt a connection to.
Yeah, I definitely felt a connection to that story too, because when Bray passed, not only was it such a creative mind in wrestling, but he's my age. I'm 37. He was 36 at the time, so he'd have been my age. But and the fact that he left behind 2 daughters, and I had just had our daughter at that time, and just like looking at my baby, and like I can't even imagine someone my age just leaving their family behind. It was just so when I read that story, I was like, man, this one really hits a little bit, you know. So,
Yeah.
So I mean, it was a great book. So my final question for you is there a part 2 in the works? There's a lot more people out there I know that'll be in a part. They would love to be in a part 2. So, what do you say?
Yes. I just finished my second interview Thursday night for the book, the second book. And I have another thing lined up at Monday Night Raw here Monday night that I'm going to be working on for it. This is going to be bigger and better and more stories because my story's been told. So I have a lot of room to fill. And my goal was I wanted the book to be longer. I was hoping to add about 30 more pages to the first one. And just being new to the formatting process, the original script of the book was like 140 pages. So I assumed, it'd be like 135 when everything was said and done. And then it was right at 100. And so, yeah, this time I'm shooting for more like 150 pages, a little bit bigger. But some of the stories I already have are even more touching than anything I've told yet. And I'm not blowing smoke up anybody's rear end. I'm being serious. There's people can find out one of the stories I'm going to be telling. There's a group called the Wrestling Club out of New York City. It's middle school students. I'm telling their story. That's going to be one of the main ones. And hopefully our goal is to connect together in Philadelphia over WrestleMania and get to see some of the kids and take some photos. There's going to be more photos in this one. So, yeah, it's going to be a lot more in-depth, I feel like. Now that I have one under my belt and it's been successful amongst wrestling fans, I think that I'm a little more confident in what I can put in this one. Not every story is going to be, a Derek Baker type story. But there's going to be a lot of stories that will make you smile and might even make some people cry. The 2 I've done already are pretty darn cool. And the one I got lined up for next week is not even in the United States. So now I'm going international with some stories, which I'm really psyched about. I think that is going to be a game changer for the book. So, yeah, there will be a second one. Timeline-wise, my goal would be to have it done hopefully by August at the latest. So done and out hopefully by August. I can't promise anything, but that's the kind of soft deadline I'm setting for myself.
I can't wait for that. And then just so people know, too, I went on your website. You can also buy an autographed copy of that book as well, which I thought was really awesome that you do that, too. So we can't wait for part 2. There is one thing we try to do on this podcast. We're going to try it now for the first time. But every guest we have on, I just want to shoot some rapid-fire questions and just see what you say and let the fans of the show just kind of get a peek into who you are. And if you're ready, I didn't kind of prep you for this, but...
No, I told you not to. No, let's do it, man. Yeah.
All right, so rapid fire. Person you would trade places with for a day.
Oh, man. I tell you, a year ago I would have said The Rock.
The Rock?
Not anymore.
Yeah, not
right now. I would say Travis Kelce.
I like that. Okay. Your guilty pleasure.
Guilty pleasure. I'm a huge Justin Timberlake fan.
I'm not going to hate on that. He's successful. Biggest risk you ever took?
Ooh. So when I first started writing at a newspaper back when I was 22, I was hired before I graduated college. Like 6 months before I graduated, I got this newspaper job as a sports editor. and I'd worked there for 2 years, and I had found out a competing paper, which was bigger than us, had an opening. So I had applied for it, and my editor found out I had applied for it. And so she came to me and she's like, well, did they offer you the job? And I told her, yes, they had. And she said, well, how much are they offering? And all truth, you know, to be truthful about it, they never offered me the position. I'd interviewed with them twice and they went with somebody else, which was fine. It was a news position. I really didn't want it. But it did pay more. So when she asked me that, I said, yeah, they offered me $5,000 more. So she went to her boss and they gave me a $5,000 raise on the spot. So that was kind of ballsy, I guess. So that might be the riskiest thing I've ever done, I guess.
I like it. What never fails to make you laugh?
Oh man. Gosh. I would say the movie Step Brothers.
I'm with you on that. I can quote that all day. Worst piece of advice you ever got?
Ooh, worst piece. I try to put the bad advice out of my mind, but I guess let's see. I was once told, I got it. I had a teacher, and this is a story I tell my students. So I had a teacher in high school who was my sophomore English teacher, and we had to write a 10-page paper for her class. And I literally spent weeks on this paper. It was a 10-page paper defending the rights of musicians from the First Amendment. So, at that time they were, you had Tipper Gore running around crushing CDs of like Ice Cube and all the gangster rappers. And I was a big gangster rapper fan. I'm sure everyone can tell I'm huge into gangster rap now, but at the time I was. So I wrote this 10-page paper basically defending like the lyrics of Eminem. This is when he had all the anti-gay stuff in his music, and Elton John and him sang at the Grammys. So I wrote this paper defending him and Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre and Tupac. And I took it to old English teachers from like junior high, and they read it and edited it, and they said it was great. And I get it back, and I got a C-. And the teacher, and then this is the whole thing that wraps the story together. The teacher on the paper wrote, "You will never write professionally. Find another career."
Wow.
A high school teacher wrote that, right? That's why I'm a high school teacher. God's honest truth. That's why I'm a teacher today, because I kept that paper. And I tell my students this. I said, when I first got it back, I was devastated. Because I was a pretty good student, and if I didn't get good grades in this class, it's just because I didn't try. But I was always very intelligent. I went on to get my doctorate and stuff, so obviously I knew what I was doing. But I went home and I was crying to my mom about it, and went over to see my grandpa, and he said, and this is a quote from one of my favorite movies. You might know this one. He said, "What are you prepared to do about it?" And he has looked at me, and I said, "What?" Well, we had just watched The Untouchables a couple of days before with Sean Connery, and there's a scene where Kevin Costner's all pissed off because Robert De Niro's character gets let go of these charges, and Sean Connery goes, "What are you prepared to do about it?" And he looked at me and just said that dead stare. And I thought, yep, you're right. So I kept that paper literally in my football locker. Anytime I went somewhere when I was in college, I kept it taped above where I slept. So every day I woke up, I would look at that and use it as a motivator. So I guess, that would be the worst advice I got was from that teacher, but I turned it into a positive.
That's awesome. That's a great story too. 2 questions left.
Mm-hmm.
Something you wish you were better at?
Money management. Absolutely. Yeah. I suck. Yeah.
Yeah. And then tell us something we don't know about you.
Ooh, I already told you I'm a Timberlake fan. Something you don't know about me. So let me think here. I'm trying to think of something interesting that people don't know about me. Oh, okay. So one of my favorite books, and this is going to sound terrible, is actually Dear John. There's a movie that was made out of it, but it's a book. I forget the writer. He writes all these sappy chick books, and
Yeah.
I read this when I was teaching 8th grade several years ago. It was right before the movie with Channing Tatum came out, and the movie's kind of crappy, but the book, man, I'm literally reading it in front of the class, and I start crying.
Oh,
I think I was just going through some things at the time, and it reminded me of like old relationships and such. And man, it broke my heart.
yeah.
I remember the kids were cracking up, and the girls in the class were crying too. And I'm just like, it was for some reason that book just stuck with me, and I could not put it down. Like we would be in the middle of class, and I'm supposed to be up there teaching something. I'm like, just keep doing silent reading, and we would do silent reading for like 45 minutes the whole class period, because I'd be so enthralled with this book. And to this day, I always think back about how that's one of my favorite books I ever read.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I appreciate you partaking in the rapid fire question. I thought your guilty pleasure was going to be that your favorite movie is No Holds Barred from the poster behind you, but
Oh man, I have all different wrestling movies lined on this wall. So like No Holds Barred's there because I ran out of room, but I have Ready to Rumble, Beyond the Mat, Nacho Libre, which I've never seen Nacho Libre. I need to. Iron Claw, The Wrestler, and the one with Florence Pugh where she plays Paige, Fighting with My Family. So I have the actual movie posters that were in theaters, and I came across the No Holds Barred one, and my grandpa actually took me to see that when I was a little kid. I'll never forget that because me and him loved Hulk Hogan, and we used to sit back and just laugh at Hulk Hogan in the ring, and then when he became an actor, we laughed even more because he was bad. But yeah, that movie, man, that's still that and Over the Top are two of my like most guilty pleasure movies because they're so tacky and corny. But I mean, who can go wrong with Over the Top? The soundtrack to it is awesome by itself.
for sure. So yeah, I appreciate you being on the show. Again, for the love of the show, great book. Check it out. I'll put the link to your website in the description box below as well. Make sure you check it out. Get you an autographed copy, and then Jeremy, it was nice having you on.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.